Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Hopeful Majority. This is episode 43, and I'm so grateful to you for listening, for joining, for building support. You are what make this show possible, and importantly, by you sharing, by retweeting, by liking, by subscribing, by leaving reviews, we're building this hopeful majority together because, yes, most of us are sick and tired of how toxic our politics are. Most of us are sick and tired of how close-minded a lot of our political pundits are. Most of us are sick and tired of the fact that you can't have a conversation. And every month, as you know, one of the special episodes we do that isn't an interview is actually, for some reason, popular demand, what my takes are and a couple of news stories. And oftentimes I provide these takes as a way to actually underline and define some of the themes that have become a part of this show. And one of those themes is the outrage industrial complex. I'm sure you've heard me talk about that. And there have been three news stories over the last couple of weeks that I think illustrate just the fact that we live in this outrage economy that causes us to jump to hot takes and quick assumptions without actually understanding the complexity of a news event, a news story. We have to have an opinion on everything. And what are these three stories? The cancer diagnosis of Kate Middleton, the tragic, tragic bridge collapse in Baltimore, and a recent news story about podcaster Andrew Huberman. Now you're like, how do these three stories connect? Well, the last time we did this show, it was about the Super Bowl, Taylor Swift, and a story regarding how we're developing AI. So, yes, you might find these three stories totally disconnected, but hang in with me because I think they underline just how outraged and how little nuance we actually apply to our public discourse. And so, with that, let's cue the intro, and here's my perspective on these three stories. The unfortunate cancer diagnosis of Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, the tragic bridge collapse in Baltimore, and the recent news story about podcaster and neuroscientist, Stanford PhD, Andrew Huberman. Now, some of you may have heard of these three stories. Some of you may have heard of a couple of these stories. Some of us may not have heard of any of these stories. So hang in with me because I've been looking and tracking at these stories over the past week or so. And I have to tell you that not only is the outrage economy real, but man, we are quick to judge. The outrage industrial complex is not only real and damaging to our discourse, but I think it's damaging for our souls. I think it's damaging for who we are as people, that we got to have our quickest takes, that we got to have our perspectives, that the first news story we see defines our entire idea of what that story actually entails. Not only is that bad for our souls, but it's also bad for public discourse. How do we solve any of our problems and our challenges? And I think one of the key features of this outrage industrial complex is our inability to wait, to be nuanced, and to assess the holistic complexity of a news story. And oftentimes we get it wrong. And these three stories, I think, illustrate that in a couple of ways. So let's go with the first one. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales. In January, and since January, there's been a lot of skepticism and a lot of buildup and a lot of theories about what the Princess of Wales has been up to. What has the royal palace been doing? People have not seen her in public light. And so a lot of folks made assumptions. There was, in fact, a photoshopped image that the palace released about featuring Kate Middleton's family. And you could tell that it was doctored. And boy, the conspiracy theories grew and the content creators jumped. And you saw people jumping on and creating hot takes and tweeting and saying, this is what I think is happening, or have they hidden the Princess of Wales, or is there a royal transition in the making? And unfortunately, all of that was false because in the past couple of weeks, we learned from a very emotional announcement that Kate Middleton had been diagnosed with cancer. She'd been diagnosed with cancer. And following that announcement, you saw a lot of those same people backtrack, those people that had trafficked in that outrage, those people that had been trafficked in hot takes and quick takes because that they knew that it would drive their engagement. Folks that felt like they had to have their latest take on what the story was, apologize and say how insincere it felt or how tragic this news story was or how bad they felt for Kate's family. I bring this up because boy, doesn't it not define the outrage. We live at this moment where everybody's got to say, this is what's going on at this moment. What if we waited? We live at this moment of deep skepticism, and in often places that skepticism is right. A lot of folks are skeptical of our institutions. A lot of folks are skeptical of those in power on both the right and the left, across the political spectrum and internationally. And oftentimes, I think we let that skepticism get the better of ourselves because I think that oftentimes healthy skepticism turns into negative outrage. And when it turns into negative outrage, and when we paint these stories with our emotions and our deep sort of seated conspiracy theories, suddenly you have a information sphere that is riddled with, forget the terms misinformation, disinformation. I know how politicized those things are. It just gets filled with junk content. What if, Kate had been offline for the past couple months because she wanted privacy for her family and was just interested in trying to deal with this issue with her family in a closed off manner? Isn't that a human reaction? Wouldn't we want that privacy? Now, imagine if you're living in the center stage of the spotlight and you're seeking that privacy because what human wouldn't? And suddenly people start making claims that you're up to something, or there's something going on, or there's bribes happening, or you're just the purveyor of something highly negative. And why is all of this driven? It's all driven because we are focused oftentimes on why something could be negative. And because of that negativity bias, and because of our desire to boost our engagement, and because of our desire to beat everybody else to an opinion, we suddenly define a concept in a negative way. And I think that's tragic because with the growth of artificial intelligence, with the growth of information, with the growth of doctored photos and images and AI videos, and I'm sure you've seen the Sora video creation by ChatGPT, we're just going to have to be much more nuanced in our analysis. We're just going to have to be much more effective at being able to parse and understand if we hope to have some reality of truth. Yes, I said the word truth. And unfortunately, we live at this moment where everybody seems to have a different definition of truth. But one thing I can say that we can all get behind in the hopeful majority is that the past 6, 7 months of conversations we've had with guests from all across the political spectrum, with presidential candidates, folks like Vivek Ramaswamy to Andrew Yang to Marianne Williamson, one thing is clear. While we might have a lot of different understandings of what our lived reality is, the fact is that there is no chance at getting to truth if the reality of our discourse is defined by hot takes. Because hot takes might be good for your engagement, they might be good for our dopamine release, but it's not good for actually trying to solve problems in our society. And that is what's so corrosive. That's what I saw with the Kate story. Second story, the tragic bridge collapse in Baltimore. Um, I'm sure most of you have seen this video, but in case you haven't, just as a quick recap, there was a ship, a cargo ship, that was sailing out of Baltimore Harbor, and it lost control and steering. And it slowly drifted into one of the support columns of the bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And it led to the complete collapse of the bridge. And while there's still information coming out, and this is still a developing story, I'll tell you that the first moment that I heard of this story was, I think, on Wednesday morning, if I remember correctly. No, Tuesday morning of last week. I heard the story. And I'll tell you, I saw it on Twitter, and somebody posted the video without any context. And in that video, you could see the ship's lights blinking and it's slowly turning into this pillar. And it kind of looked weird, if I'm honest with you. And what did this person's analysis say? It said that the ship had been hacked by foreign terrorists, and that this is just another example of foreign actors that are going to create black swan events that might destroy our country. And now this was the first thing I'd ever seen of this video. I had not read the news at all. I'd just woken up and I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, is there a foreign attack happening? Or is this a cyber attack on this vessel? And so I looked into it further because, again, immediately my perception of the story was defined by this one take that this one person had, because they probably were highly skeptical of our institutions and wanted to say this is what they saw. And yet, as you slowly uncovered the story and you learn more into it and you watch the video and you read more news articles, there's actually an audio that came out of first responders that had received a call, a mayday call from the ship that said that we've lost steering and we've dropped an anchor and that we currently don't have control of the ship. And you could hear first responders saying, everybody's got to get off the bridge. We got to stop traffic. Unfortunately, they couldn't stop all the traffic, but they got and saved a lot of lives. And that video and audio came out about 6 or 7 hours after I saw that initial video from that original poster. And it turned out that the fact is that while the story is still developing, there might be multiple causes, there might be multiple issues. There's a lot of nuance to these sorts of moments. And yet people immediately jumped to maybe there's a cyber attack. Maybe this reveals the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure. Perhaps our government is hiding something. And I get it. I get it. I understand the skepticism that we hold to our society right now because, yes, we live at a moment of deep mistrust, deep division. It's hard to understand what the right information is. But we can at least commit to this, which is maybe we shouldn't take the first news story or perspective or view that we see about something as rock solid truth and discount everything else. Maybe, just maybe, we do what, I don't know, folks that are media literate like us might want to do, which is let's wait. Let's see stories from multiple angles. I had on the founder of All Sides, John Gable, on one of the previous episodes, and All Sides is a tool that helps you assess the media bias in news stories. And maybe we should, you know, hold the tragic loss of folks in that event in our prayers instead of being the first to have a political agenda and identify that this is why something is happening. And we see this over and over again. I just saw this bridge collapse and I saw it happening at scale and I saw this story spreading and I almost felt victim to it, which is why I felt compelled to share this with you. That, well, yes, we're going to see a lot of perspectives. Yes, we're inundated with information, but let's at least start building the skill to not be pawns in this outrage industrial complex. Because the fact is that stories like this are going to continue happening. It's been the history of human civilization since the start of time that we're going to have breaking news, we're going to have breaking events, and people are going to be struggling, and there's going to be strife and war and conflict. And if we actually are to navigate this century, this 21st century, and if we're to make tomorrow better than today, I can definitively state that yes, we have a lot of different views, and yes, there's a lot of skepticism, but one thing that will definitely not get us closer to building a better world is by relying on people's hot takes that are driven by engagement and don't actually feature the nuanced reality of the world. The nuanced reality of the world. There's complexity to stories, there's complexity to people. And that brings me to the last story that I wanted to share. Now, some of you might have heard of probably one of the most famous, if not the most watched, listened to health podcast in the country called Huberman Lab. It's led by a man named Andrew Huberman, who's a neuroscientist, biologist, PhD out of Stanford. He has a lab there. And he started this podcast in 2019 that was focused on health. The basic theme of the podcast, and I have to say that I'm somebody that's listened to this podcast a lot, it's helped me, is focused on mental health and it's focused on understanding how we become healthier. The idea is that you are actually in control of your biology to an extent, that you can overcome a lot of the challenges you experience. So here's what happened. Last week, a news story came out from the New York Magazine, and the journalist wrote a story about how Andrew Huberman had multiple personal affairs and was somebody that might have had a personal life that was very complicated. And they framed it specifically as negative and controlling. Now, that might be true. That might be true. But what does that personal life have to do with the scientific facts and evidence of this person's podcast? A podcast that many say have helped millions of people. The fact is that we are complex as human beings. You might find his behavior incredibly terrible, morally corrupt. I don't like that behavior. But what I will tell you is that we as people make mistakes. There's a lot of challenges in our lives. We're nuanced individuals. There's a lot of complexity. And we live at this moment of constantly judging people at their worst and discounting the reality of the information that they're actually providing. Andrew Huberman's podcast has nothing to do with relationships. It's got everything to do with neuroscience and figuring out how we can be more productive in our lives, how we can manage stress. Now, if the news article was all about how his podcast was filled with misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, whatever you want to call it, if it was filled with riddled scientific evidence that what he was saying was wrong, then there's something there. But I saw over the last week people destroy and try to take down the platform of his scientific based reasoning on how we become better at our lives because of this news story about his personal story. And, there's more to people than that. The fact is that we are trying to always get better. I'll tell you, as somebody that's younger, watching our outrage culture that's focused on constantly taking down people and all across the political spectrum, that it really disincentivizes somebody like me to try and get more public and to try and spread our message, to bring this hopeful majority to new and greater heights, because you feel like you're going to constantly be attacked and judged for the worst parts of your life. And I'm the first to say that not all of us live perfect lives. I don't think most of us do. And yet, public life is the standard of perfection. And of course, it should be to an extent, because we have earned, as public figures, you earn that stage. You're a leader. People look up to you. You have a different level of responsibility. But that said, we have to unbundle people. We have to recognize that there's a lot of value to somebody, and there's also a lot of negativity to somebody. One of my good friends once told me that human nature is equally defined by love and hate. It's two sides of the same coin. All of us are equally susceptible to hating, and all of us are equally susceptible to loving. The question is, what parts of us do we call up more? I can guarantee you, without even knowing every public figure out there, that they all have complex lives. And so, rather than potentially holding up public figures as pedestals, as people that are morally impeccable, that are fantastic, maybe we should just hold them up as who they are, as humans that are trying their best, just like the rest of us. This is not a defense of public figures. What this is a fact that you and I want to live in a world in which we're given the chance to be better. We're given a chance to not be constantly judged, but maybe we can say things that are on our mind that are wrong so that we can get feedback to improve. But if the standard is perfection constantly, not only are good people going to be deterred from trying to do great things, but all of us are going to live in a culture of fear. And that's ultimately the biggest problem with this, is by being quick to judge and by using one perspective or view, we're defining and building a culture where people are walking on eggshells and not enjoying and willing and being and practicing what it means to be human, which is a practice and a way of existence that is defined by flaws and by successes, by failures and great progress. Humanity, all of us, we're complex beings. And I think this is one of the key drivers of our polarization right now and our division. And I'll wrap this up with this, which is that if we build a culture of fear where we're quick to judge, where outrage is our economy, where we recognize that to get the most engagement, get the most likes, build the greatest audience, you have to have your hottest take at the first drop of a hat when a new story takes on, and that is your perspective till the end of time. Well, damn, we have built a society not built for nuance, and boy, do we need nuance more than ever. With the proliferation of new technologies, with the proliferation of artificial intelligence, with the fire hose of information that all of us consume, don't we want to live in a world where we're not quick to judge, but we're quick to build a nuanced understanding of what might be happening in our world? Complexity. That's the driving force that we need. The Kate Middleton story, the tragic bridge collapse, the Andrew Huberman kerfuffle on social media. You might have a lot of different perspectives on each of these things, and you probably disagreed with some things I said, but that's good. It's good to disagree. All I'm saying is the way that I've seen these three stories unfold over the last couple of weeks has shown to me and has continued to reify this hypothesis that rather than trying to search for what is true or trying to build an understanding that, let's say, might be flawed, but is our best attempt at being complex and being a little bit more nuanced, we're living at this moment where we're all focused on our engagement, on our outrage, and that leads to a society that I don't think is built for success. If we want to build a world that values curiosity, that values open-mindedness, that values the values of the show that you and I are building together, which is let's have conversations across difference, we need to be willing to be more complex in our understanding of the world. Here's my call to action. The next time we see a news story, let's read multiple perspectives, multiple viewpoints. Let's wait a day or two. The fact is that not every news develops and ends in 30 seconds. There's a lot more to it. And I should be the last person saying this, but I can just see that we're just headed towards a machine that we're being played in. And that's the most important thing. Extricate ourselves from this game. Live above it. We don't have to be pawns in this complex of outrage. We can choose to be independent thinkers. We can be independent thinkers that are guided by really good information and understanding that, yes, there's a lot of sources of information. So let's take multiple sources of information. And I'll just say that over this past 7 months, the journey that we've been on with the show together, we've interviewed and heard so many interesting perspectives, so many different tools. Let's deploy that. Let's build this hopeful majority. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you being here every Monday. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your content. Please leave a like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave a review. We're trying to build this world of nuance, and the only way it gets built is by people like you and I raising our voices, by elevating our microphones. Because remember, we are in the majority, and that majority is hopeful. I'll see you next week.